Hi everyone, I'm Eric with Protofuse, and today I'm chatting with James Carbary from Sweetfish Media. Hey James, how's it going, man?
Good man. How are you doing, Eric?
I'm doing great. So James and I have known each other for a while. We like to meet for lunch every once in a while, and usually the topic revolves around content marketing or some sort of new tool out there that we each need to try. And I really respect the fact that James has got that sort of spirit where he constantly wants to improve and try new tools, and he realizes that marketing is about experimentation and testing and seeing what works and what doesn't. So recently James was talking a little bit about this idea of a content waterfall, and he got the idea from Gary Vaynerchuk and kind of got my interest piqued a bit. And I thought, hey, why not just bring James on the show and talk a little bit about this idea of repurposing content, and what does that look like, and what are the challenges there, and how can companies repurpose content and move into different channels and be unique and do it effectively. So James is a great person to talk to. So James, why don't you just tell a little bit about what you do at Sweetfish, maybe your background, and get everyone up to speed there.
Yeah. So I actually I did helicopter logistics for NASCAR, as crazy as that is, right out of college, and that was my first kind of experience working for an entrepreneur, seeing how small business runs, kind of from the ground level. That was incredible, and then transitioned into a technology company. From there, went to a tech startup, and always kind of gravitated toward the marketing side of things. I didn't know that that would end up being that I would build a business around it at any point, but I always enjoyed it, and so that's a little bit of the professional background. And then leading up to what we do now, we started Sweetfish actually as a more traditional content marketing agency. So I was interviewing a lot of small business owners, marketing managers, just talking to them about their industry, different things that their customers are asking them about a lot, because they didn't have time to write content. And so I had a team of writers. And so I would basically do this interview with them, record the call, send it to our team of writers, and they would turn it into a well-formatted blog post. So these folks that otherwise wouldn't have time to create the content now could, because we were that outlet for them. We've since transitioned from doing that. Now we produce podcasts for B2B companies. So really through a series of experimentation and trying to figure out like what are the strategies to market our own business better, we realized that podcasting was this incredible medium that allowed you to not only create lots of great industry specific content, but also allowed you to create really strategic relationships with the exact people that you want to either partner with you to help you sell your product, or ideal clients, thought leaders to establish your brand's own thought leadership. So that's kind of the evolution of me professionally into what we're doing now with Sweetfish.
Very cool. Yeah, when James we first met, you were doing the blog writing quite a bit, and I remember talking to you a lot about some of the challenges, and with a business like that, obviously today content marketing is so prevalent. I think the last study I saw, 95% of B2B companies are doing content marketing, and then 92% of B2C companies. Obviously, people realize from an inbound marketing perspective, you need to commit to writing content, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy. So, I thought, since you did provide that service, and you were able to sit in from the initial strategy to the actual publishing side of it. Why is new content so hard to create? Why is the act of coming up with the idea and publishing it? Maybe share with our audience a little bit some of the challenges that you faced while you sort of did that at Sweetfish.
Yeah, so there are a lot of reasons why content creation is so hard. I think the biggest one, I think, is around time. That folks, because it's a long term play, because there's not this instant benefit. I'm not going to create this blog post and instantly have a flood of inbound leads come in. That because of that, it's hard to make it a priority. But if you never make it a priority, you never wind up with a bank of content that makes you the thought leader, or that allows Google to point people that otherwise would not know who you are to your site. So the motivation is hard, because it's this long-term play that everyone's talking about, and they've been talking about it for long enough now that that you need to be doing it, but
Mm-hmm.
because there's not an immediate benefit, it's hard to create the time in your schedule to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think time being number one, and motivation being a close second, because of, it takes 6 to 12 months to really start seeing some legitimate results from it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's how I found you, Eric. Like reaching out to you whenever I did 2 years ago, I think I found you because I Googled marketing agencies in Orlando because I was wanting to connect with other like-minded people, and because you blog about this stuff so much and have been for years, you were one of the first results that popped up in Google. And so I think your story of what you're doing with content and how consistent you are proves that it works, but everybody's heard those stories. Everybody knows that it works. It's just finding the motivation and then creating the time to actually do it. And then the other one, you touched on it, but once you've been doing it for a while, it can become really hard to, like, okay, what do we talk about? So from like just having ideas, like, okay, we've talked about kind of the core benefits of what we do, and kind of why the people that we're trying to sell to need to be thinking about, whatever it is that hopefully maps in some way to your product or service. But eventually you kind of run out of it. You're like, okay, what else did we talk about? And so having ideas is another challenge. I make it third behind time and motivation, because a lot of times once you do block the time and you are motivated by the long-term benefit of it, the ideas come a little bit naturally. Like as you're producing more content, you're starting to get feedback from the people consuming it, and so it sparks other ideas. But that's not always foolproof, and if you're trying to be consistent with it, like having an idea to fill a content calendar for an entire quarter, you're like, man, I need 12 ideas and I've only got like 4. What do I do? So that's what I think would be the 3 biggest challenges to being consistent with content creation.
Yeah, that's great. And if I can add to that too, I think with our experience, some of the challenges that I think a lot of clients face is all the nuances of the platforms, right? So if we're talking specifically about blogging, I think people can wrap their heads around that. A blog goes on a website. We then can share that blog and work around sort of the distribution of that content and bring them back to our website. But I think, getting back to maybe the topic of what I really want to dig in today is this fact of sort of repurposing, right? Because I mean, I've been in the same boat, and recently I just kind of took your advice and you motivated me a little bit. I wrote a blog on modern day SEO and kind of the 3 pieces that really matter today. And I thought, well, I haven't really dabbled, Protofuse itself hasn't really dabbled a whole lot in Instagram. Why don't I just break out, this concept of these 3 pieces into 3 different videos and then push that to Instagram and sort of learn the nuances of the platform. And that's kind of the concept of this waterfall approach that Gary Vaynerchuk, who both you and I just love to death, and he's a little colorful, but he's a smart guy, and he practices what he preaches, and so he's got this idea of this waterfall approach. So maybe in 30, 45 seconds, you can tell us a little bit about what this waterfall approach is.
Yeah. So the way we've defined it is having a clearly defined structure that allows you to consistently create content that then can fuel an entire content marketing strategy. And so with Gary V and his example, his 2 kind of pillar pieces of content that he creates consistently are the Ask Gary V show, which is fueled by questions that his audience asks him. And because he's got such a large brand, he's always got people asking him questions. Sure. So that's the core of his waterfall. That's the stream that leads to the waterfall, is his audience asking questions. He gets in front of a camera for 15 minutes and answers them. The next one is he's got a guy that follows him around with a video camera all day, and they make these like 10 to 12 minute documentary style videos, and he calls it Daily V. So it's this video blog that he does. And so that's his second pillar piece of content. He goes on rants. There's, the guy catches him in conversations with potential clients and different and employees, and then they pull pieces of those conversations to then fuel the waterfall, all the other content that he's putting out. If you look at it, it all stems from these two simple, relatively straightforward and simple streams of consistent content, which are Ask Gary V and Daily V. So that, in a nutshell, is what waterfall content is. It's having that clearly defined structure that allows you to be consistent with it. And then once you have that structure, then you can start to fuel your entire content campaign because you've got the content there.
Sure. And then he takes that content and, he's everywhere. He's on Snapchat, he's on Instagram, he's on Twitter. Like he's a bit of a talking head for social media itself. So, it makes sense for a guy like that to be in every channel. But, let's talk about a small to mid-sized business, right?
Yeah.
Where maybe just yesterday they bought into the idea of business blogging and they see the benefits and they realize, like you mentioned, it's a long-term approach and they get that and they understand it. What does that look like exactly? I realize content strategy is important, but what does that look like rather than just a copy and paste into another channel? How do you repurpose it? How do you approach that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people think just copy and paste, like create it one place and then anywhere else, you can just kind of take the collective whole of whatever that piece of content was and transition it to something else. And you and I know, because we study this stuff a lot, that that's just not a very effective approach. That with Instagram, if you've got to have square images. I mean, at a very basic level, like with LinkedIn, a certain type of content plays better with LinkedIn. And so if the business that's just embraced blogging creates an article that doesn't necessarily align with what's the type of content that gets the most engagement on LinkedIn, then maybe you want to take just a piece of that article that you just wrote and create a LinkedIn published post, or like what you were doing with Instagram video. Like, are there 3 kind of big ideas from this blog that I just wrote that I could get in front of a camera for 30? I think Instagram allows 60 seconds now for video, and so could I do a little 45-second video on this little section of this blog post? And so you're not trying to copy and paste and do everything on every channel, but now that you've got that piece of content created, you want to slice and dice and use it on channels where it's going to be most effective. A lot of behind the scenes stuff you see on Facebook Live and different Periscope and things like that. So are there, your thought process, maybe your creative meeting as you and your marketing team are meeting, trying to figure out what are we going to talk about? Maybe a Facebook Live that's something that's getting a lot of engagement now, like the behind the scenes element of things. So obviously that's not copy and paste. You're not copying and pasting the content, but you're telling a different narrative about because you're talking about how you came to that. So I think around repurposing, that's what I think most people think in their head. It's just copy and paste, but it's far from it. It's actually fun to think through, like how can we take this and use it get a lot of mileage out of it. And I think that answers the motivation piece too. And the challenge that I talked about with why creating content is so hard is the lack of motivation. But when like, man, I know that because I'm strategically creating content, this is actually going to get a lot of mileage, because once I'm done with this, I can use it here, here, and here. And that's actually, we might actually see, like, shake some things up and legitimately get some leads coming in, because we're starting to become, in a lot of places, like we're being known on LinkedIn, in groups that we're active on there. We're also starting to pick up a following with our email newsletter, or whatever that case may be, and we're going to repurpose a piece of this as an email that we send out to our list. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's good. I think for me, for many years, it's always been about how can I write the best blog post that I can about a specific topic or a specific idea, and then move on to the next idea,
Excellent.
right?
Yep.
Like, let me go into my Evernote and all the ideas I've had over the last couple of years. I'm like, okay, which idea do I want to push up? I've been talking a lot about content marketing lately. Maybe I need to start talking about user experience or maybe conversion. And then I move that one up. But it's been very much of create the content, do some distribution there, and then move on and really focus on the new creation engine rather than thinking about, okay, this specific blog post, how can I pull out snippets of it, right, and repurpose it into other channels that would be useful? Maybe there's a different audience on that channel. Maybe there's an opportunity to connect with somebody that wouldn't be coming to our website and looking, at our content coming in via, organic search, which is where we get a lot of our traffic from. So I love this concept. I'm totally like 100% sold. As people start to understand content marketing and, what can we do practically to really like not get burned out, but also really like use these other channels, because not everybody's just on Instagram. Not everybody is just on Twitter. Like, look at most people's phones and they're going to have at least 2 or 3 social channels that they somewhat interact with. So I think it's important to make sure you're dabbling in that area. So let's transition this into some practical tips, right? And how you repurpose your content. How do you go from creating maybe a blog post or a video and then convert that video to a blog post, to an Instagram videos, to Facebook videos? Like, what are some practical things that you've done or you've seen clients do that have really worked?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Eric. And that's really kind of why we pivoted from doing these content interviews where we were just interviewing business owners and marketing managers and turning them into blog posts to the podcast format. Because for us, as we're talking about kind of a content waterfall, the stream for us is our podcast. It's called B2B Growth. And so,
which is an awesome podcast, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, you've been on a couple episodes. So that show for us is the little stream of content that we create, and it's a daily show for us. So 7 days a week, we feature a different 12 to 15 minute interview, real similar to what we're doing here. It's audio, and we're talking with practitioners, people that are sales and marketing executives in B2B companies. Our core service, podcast production, services sales and marketing executives. So we want to create content that they're interested in. So to do that, we have this podcast. That audio then gets sent to somebody on our writing team. And instead of having to come up with ideas of what do we want to talk about, we actually ask our guest, hey, what's a challenge you've recently overcome? What's maybe a process or a workflow that you guys have just figured out that's really helping you guys move the needle? Is there a certain type of methodology, sales methodology or marketing methodology that you're using and really embracing as an organization? If so, let's talk about that. And so we're not having to come up with the ideas. Our guests are coming up with the ideas for us. We record it in a 12 to 15 minute podcast interview. From there, our writing team is able to turn it into a blog post. Sometimes they're shorter form pieces of content, 750 to 1,000 words. Other times they're mega posts. They're 2,000 plus words. We had the CEO of Yesware on our show, and
great tool, by the way. Love Yesware.
Yesware is an incredible tool, and he had these really like well defined tips and there was a lot of them. I think there's 10 or 11. And so we were able to turn that into a mega piece of content. And from a content perspective, the longer form your content can be, the more Google's going to like it, and the more helpful and valuable it's going to be. So doing these 200 word pieces, for a lot of reasons aren't effective. But so the audio then turned into a blog post, and then from there, as the writer is creating the blog post, he's also on the lookout for little like quote snippets. So things that either Jonathan, our co-host, or myself said during the interview, or things that guests said during the interview, and they call those out. So they put those quotes, and then we turn those into click to tweets. So those click to tweets can be embedded inside the blog post, but then they can also be turned into standalone graphics. And so we've got audio now, we've got written word and blog post, we've got these snippets that can be turned into both click to tweet things that can be shareable, updates on Twitter. We can also use them as updates for Facebook and for LinkedIn posts. All of our writers, for each episode that we do, we come up with multiple headlines. Those headlines can also serve as smaller status updates. Those quotes can be used as LinkedIn updates. So that gives you a little bit of insight as to how, like, our stream, the interview itself, then turns into blog content, then turns into graphics, both headline graphics, the title of the episode, the multiple titles of the episode, and the quotes. And then we've also played around with doing some behind the scenes stuff where, while we're doing the interview, we have a camera going and we'll film, Jonathan and I doing the interview, or after the interview. If there's a particular thing that's compelling, we'll get on Anchor, which is a basically audio version of Twitter. And it's like, it allows you to do little 2-minute audio clips. And so we'll get on Anchor and we'll say, like, hey man, just interviewed Eric Sharp from ProDifuse, and he had a ton of great things to say. Here were my 3 big takeaways from our interview with him. So we've now taken the interview with you. That's going to be a blog post. It's going to be image graphics. It's going to be there's going to be social media updates embedded in there as well. And then we've now turned it into these small little snippets of audio for Anchor. We've done a behind the scenes video so that we have a longer form video component. We can chop that video component up to make maybe smaller videos. So it can start to get a little overwhelming whenever you think about, like, but right. To me it's motivating, because if the core problem is, man, I don't have time because I'm not making time. Like, everyone has time. We all have the same 24 hours in a day. So Gary Vee has the same 24 hours that you and I do. He's obviously creating the content because he sees the value in it. And so he's blocking off that time to do it because he's motivated to do so, because he knows ultimately that it's going to map to results. Yeah. And so I think when and so I don't want to overwhelm the folks watching this. Oh my God, like, all these things that I now have to do. No, right. All these things you get to do. You don't have to do any of this. You and I could just do this this video right here, and that would still be great content for your brand. Like, you pop it up on YouTube, that's great. You don't have to do anything with it. But the fact that 2 weeks from now, when you're like, man, like, I'm short on time, or whatever, I'm about to go on vacation, I'm trying to like, how am I gonna fuel my content engine while these 2 weeks while I'm away with my family? Oh man, I had that interview with James. I'm going to take 30 minutes and bust it up into a couple quote graphics, and I'll load it into Facebook, or I'll load it into LinkedIn, so that those quote graphics go out while I'm gone. Or I'm going to take from the blog post that we created out of it, I'm going to take those little small snippets and turn it into a few different Medium articles for Medium, or your LinkedIn. You can do those published posts on LinkedIn. So that's how I think about it. That's how we think about it. That's how we do it for our clients. So for us, it all stems from an audio podcast. It could stem from something like this, a video interview, whatever. I would challenge the people listening to this to really think through, what's the easiest way for you to take what's in your head and get it out. So for some people, they're really comfortable in front of a camera. So putting a camera up in front of you and just talking about it is the easiest way to do it. But you get them in front of a laptop and ask them to write an article, they don't have your skill set. Like, they don't know how to, like, take their thoughts and turn it into an article. So the easiest thing for them is to create the video and then repurpose that video. Sure. Have somebody on their team repurpose that video into written word. So that's how we're thinking about it.
So, question, as you were talking, I was wondering, clients, companies that want to start to dive into this and focus on repurposing. Is it the strategy that comes first, as in, like, hey, I've got this idea for a piece of content, and once we're done with maybe a video, then we're going to repurpose it XYZ? Or is it more sort of an organic thing? You, based upon the content that you create, after you publish it, you say, wow, this would be really great to split up into this, this, and this. And that's kind of what happened with this blog post that I wrote about modern day SEO. I said, this is a really interesting topic. A lot of people are discussing it. There's a lot of angles to take. So I'm like, I don't want to be done with this blog post, but I had to write it first. I had to get modern day SEO. Yeah. Then I'm like, well, actually, it's about 3 different things. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe I could split these 3 different things into different sort of videos, and I was like, well, Instagram is a channel that I want to start producing more content on. That seemed like the easy choice for me, but that didn't come till after I wrote the content piece. Is there necessarily a one size fits all there where you should start with a strategy first, or is it okay to be organic sometimes?
I think that's a great question, man. I think at first I would err on the side of not being glued to a strategy, because unless there's somebody else in your space that's already proved what works and what doesn't, which a lot of times there's not an example like of a specific industry of somebody who's just crushing it with content, and even if there is, I would argue that their audience is probably slightly different than your audience, and so experimenting on the front end of really diving into this content stuff is probably going to be best for you, because you may create those 3 videos on Instagram for a few months, Eric, and get 0 engagement because you find out, man, the people that I'm trying to attract, or you get engagement, but they're from people that aren't really who you're trying to get engagement from.
Right.
So you then go, okay, well, I don't need to bake Instagram into my strategy because I tried it for a few months and it didn't work. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you come into it with like your mindset focused on like, we're going to do this, this, and this, you're married to the tactic and not the results that you're getting from it. And I think that's probably a detrimental to like results that you could ultimately be getting.
Sure.
If you're in more of a spirit of experimentation. Now, and it'll probably take you a while of doing this stuff before you really get into a rhythm of like, man, when we put this stuff on LinkedIn, it goes nuts. Or when we do this stuff on Snapchat, like crazy. Like I would not have expected this. Or man, when we put stuff on our own blog, it doesn't really work that well. But when we put it on Medium, for whatever reason, it catches fire because we use this particular hashtag or this search term that is really hot on Medium right now.
Right.
And so there's all these different variables that play in that I think it's so... I get a little bit tired of people saying like, oh, well, it depends on your audience. It depends on your audience. But the reason people say that is because it's so true. Like your audience and who you're trying to attract with Repurpose, it looks pretty similar to who I'm trying to attract with Sweetfish, but there's still nuances and there's still differences.
Yeah.
And so I think that's I hope that answers your question. Those thoughts on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on a detail too a couple minutes ago that, don't be afraid to dabble with, if like you've written a blog post, for example, and that's the easiest for me to relate to because that's a big part of our content strategy is writing blogs. But the headline that you use for the blog post, you could use a different headline, right, to draw that attention of that ideal client, right?
Yep.
In a different way. You could reword it in a way. You could still use the guts of the content and sort of refactor it for the channel that you're putting it in. But that headline can be something where don't be afraid to try out a new headline and then get back to the metric side of it and look at that click-through rate and, is this working, is it not? Maybe it's a great opportunity to learn the nuances of the channel, right?
Yep.
I haven't yet published to LinkedIn. I'm going to start. But, when you do start creating content in these different channels, there's definitely a learning curve that's involved. But at the end of the day, it's about, you hit on it, experimentation. It's about diving in. It's about learning what works, what doesn't work. But it's not about anymore about creating a piece of content and moving on to something different. It's about looking at, gosh, I really zoomed in on something really critical here that almost could be spun off as either a new blog post or a different video, or we could take this snippet of this graphic and this quote and put it over here. And you could come up with an endless amount of content through just a couple pieces of core content, in one specific channel, which is really exciting, for marketers to know that, to have the availability of all these tools that we can use, that make it super easy to publish. It's just getting your head wrapped around how do I sort of repurpose this and maximize my time,
Yeah, and it's motivating. I mean, I keep going back to that idea of motivation, but when you're really trying to block out time in your calendar for things, if you're not motivated to do something, you're not going to make the time to do it. And when you go into a content planning meeting with your team, knowing that, hey, this piece of content that we're going to work on this month, it could fuel our entire like it could fuel the content that we push out for an entire quarter. Yeah, like that's exciting. Like we have to do this once. Like we got to nail this one blog post or this, one interview that we're doing with this thought leader in our space or this prospect that we're courting, and we're bringing them on the podcast to talk about, how they've grown or, a specific element of their business. Like what questions do we want to ask, or what do we want to get out of it? Like it's motivating to know that one anchor piece of content can produce a waterfall effect.
Yeah, man. This is so cool. Like you and I, we have lunches where we talk about this stuff for hours at a time. So, I know that we could keep going here, but I think we really were able to extract a lot of good stuff out of you. Thanks. I really appreciate your perspective. Why don't you tell everyone how they could possibly connect with you?
Yeah, man. So you can learn more about what we do at sweetfishmedia.com. We've got a little a thing on there how you can opt in and learn how we've leveraged our podcast to add over $1 million to our sales pipeline in under 90 days. And so I'd encourage anybody that's interested in figuring out, how can I leverage a content medium like a podcast to actually add real revenue to my pipeline. Also, I love connecting with folks on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, do a lot of publishing there, and I've had a lot of great conversations with folks that I've been on their podcast, they've been on ours. We've done some partnership content stuff. So find me on LinkedIn. My last name is Carbary, and you can find me there. I think I'm one of the only James Carbarys on there. So those are how folks can stay connected with me, and I'd love to connect with anybody. Anybody that's following ProtoFuse, I'm probably going to be a fan of.
Cool, man. Well, thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it, and have a good one.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it on my side too.